Hey guys, tonight we are slipping into the salt-sprayed boots of a Viking navigator, not in the height of a furious raid, but in the quiet, pre-dawn stillness of an endless sea. You are standing at the gunwale of a longship, the dragon-headed prow slicing through the black, glassy water of the North Atlantic. The world is reduced to the creak of oak planks, the gentle slap of waves against the hull, and the impossibly vast canopy of stars overhead, each one a sharp, cold pinprick in the velvet darkness. Your breath mists in the air, a fleeting cloud in the frigid night, and the wool of your cloak is heavy with the damp, salty air. This is not a time for roaring songs or the clash of axes. This is a time of intense, silent observation, a battle not against men, but against the disorienting, featureless void of the ocean. You are utterly alone with the cosmos, and your survival, the survival of every man on this ship, depends on your ability to read the subtle language of the heavens. One misjudgment, one forgotten marker in the sky, and the world becomes a trackless prison of water and sky, a slow and sleepy end waiting beneath the waves. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're down there, feel free to drop a comment with your location and your local time. It's always fascinating to see where in the world we're all drifting off together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. There is no clock to glance at, no digital readout, glowing an angry red in the dark. Your entire concept of time is written above you, a slowly rotating clock face whose hands are constellations, and whose center point is a star we call Polaris, the North Star. To you, it's Lidar Stjarna, the leading star, the one fixed point in the wheeling dance of the night. This is the absolute bedrock of Viking navigation and timekeeping after dark. While everyone else is just seeing a pretty sky, you're seeing a complex, three-dimensional map and schedule. You note not just where the Lidar Stjarna is, but the position of the other key constellations around it. The Viking wagon, what we call the Big Dipper, is your hand, as it rotates counterclockwise around Polaris throughout the night. Its position tells you how much of the darkness has passed and how much is left to go. It's a cosmic clock that never needs winding, never runs slow, and is visible from any clear night in the northern hemisphere. This is the mainstream, well-documented fact of their celestial prowess. They were masters of the night sky out of sheer, brutal necessity. But the night holds more secrets than just the obvious stars. Historians still argue whether the Vikings had names and stories for all the constellations we know today, or if their celestial map was entirely different, populated with wolves, gods, and wagons lost to our modern interpretations. It is a fascinating thought that we might be looking at the same stars but seeing completely different pictures, their myths forever silent in the historical record. Now, for the quirky tidbit, the kind of thing that makes you go HMM as your eyelids get heavy. Along with watching the sky, some sagas and folklore suggest the Vikings paid very close attention to the sea itself. Not just the waves, but its color and temperature. The idea was that experienced sailors could detect the faint milky glow of distant ice fields reflected on the undersides of clouds, a phenomenon known as ice blink, or identify specific currents by their slight difference in temperature against their skin. Imagine that dipping your hand over the side of the ship, feeling the subtle coolness of a melting glacier miles away, and using that sensory input to estimate your latitude and the time of year. It sounds like fantasy, the kind of hypersensitive, almost mythical skill a hero in a saga would possess, but there's enough anecdotal evidence to suggest there might be a grain of truth to it, a lost art of tactile navigation. So you stand there, at the rail. The weight of the responsibility is a physical thing, a stone in your gut. You're cold, you're tired, but sleep is a luxury you can't afford. Your world is this ship, the sea, the sky. You track the slow, imperceptible arc of the wagon around the pole star. You've memorized its position at sunset, and now you judge its movement, translating that arc into the passage of time. You're not thinking in hours and minutes. You're thinking in watches and segments of the night. How long until the sky begins to lighten in the east? How long until the men on the night watch are relieved by those struggling out of their furs below deck? Your timekeeping is functional, visceral. It answers the most basic human questions. Are we there yet? When can I sleep? When do I eat? The rhythm of the ship is dictated by this celestial metronome. There's a deep, profound loneliness to it, but also a connection to the universe that we, with our smartphone clocks and atomic time standards, have completely lost. You are a part of the mechanism, a living, breathing cog in the grand clockwork of the cosmos. feeling the turn of the world beneath your feet and seeing it spin above your head. The stars don't care about your mission, your king, or your fate. They simply are. And your only job is to listen to their silent, steady ticking. The stars, your faithful guides, begin to fade not with the rising sun, but with the creeping, silent enemy, fog. A thick, woolly blanket of gray descends, swallowing the masthead, erasing the horizon, and muting the world into a formless, damp hush. The familiar constellations, your clock face, are gone. The sun, your other great timekeeper, is now just a faint, diffuse glow somewhere beyond the oppressive gray, offering no direction, no warmth, no sense of the hour. This is the navigator's true nightmare. The ship drifts in a cocoon of nothingness, a ghost vessel in a world without edges or landmarks. Time becomes elastic, stretching and compressing with a disorienting dread. Was it moments ago the stars were clear, or has it been hours? Your stomach tightens. This is how voyages fail. This is how good crews, lost and directionless, succumb to thirst or run aground on unseen shores. One of the men, a younger warrior with more brawn than sea time, mutters a curse about the gods abandoning them. You ignore him, your hand going to a small, nondescript leather pouch tied securely to your belt. This is where myth and necessity collide. This is where you might rely on the Salarstein, the sunstone. You loosen the drawstring and tip the stone into your palm. It's not what a modern mind would picture. It's not a glowing gem from a fantasy tale. It's likely a roughly hexagonal, translucent piece of Iceland spar, a form of calcite crystal, cloudy and unremarkable to the untrained eye, but in your hand, it holds a potential magic. The mainstream historical fact here, backed by a fascinating archaeological discovery, is that a crystal exactly matching the description of a sunstone was found on the wreck of an Elizabethan warship that sank in 1592. The Alderney shipwreck, while later than the Viking Age, its presence on a sailing ship, alongside dividers and navigational tools, provides a tangible link to a persistent legend. The theory, demonstrated in modern experiments, is stunningly simple and brilliant. You hold the crystal up and rotate it slowly, peering through it towards the hidden sun. Even through the thick overcast, the calcite crystal has a unique property. It polarizes light. At a certain precise angle of rotation, the cloudiness of the crystal suddenly clears, becoming transparent, revealing a bright splotch of light indicating the sun's position. It doesn't show you the sun, but it points the way to it, like a key finding a hidden lock. You mark the spot on the gunwale, wait a while, and do it again, now able to trace the sun's slow, hidden path across the sky. You've just built yourself a primitive clock under a blanket of fog. Historians still argue whether every longship captain had one of these or if they were the rare, prized tools of only the most elite navigators, passed down like cherished heirlooms. Was it commonplace or the nautical equivalent of a secret weapon? The sagas mention them, but sagas are also full of dragons and gods, so the line between tool and legend is beautifully, frustratingly blurred. Now for the quirky, almost absurd tidbit that makes you smile into your furs. While the sunstone is the famous one, some texts and folklore suggest other, even more esoteric methods for dealing with the gloom. One involves waiting for a bird, specifically, releasing a raven from a cage on deck. The idea was that a hungry raven, if released and if it saw land, would fly straight and purposefully towards it, giving you a bearing. If it saw nothing but endless ocean, the story goes, it would circle listlessly above the ship or simply return to its cage out of boredom. So, your entire sense of direction and timing could, in theory, hinge on the mood and appetite of a disgruntled corvid. It's a charmingly chaotic idea, trusting a creature known for its trickster nature to guide a warship. You can almost hear the Viking equivalent of a navigator complaining, "Don't ask me, ask the bird. And for Odin's sake, someone feed him something. He's being difficult again." So you stand in the fog, the cold seeping into your bones, the crystal in your hand. You find the sun's hidden point, mark it, and feel a small surge of victory against the oppressive gray. You have a bearing, you have a rough sense of the time. Knowing the sun should be climbing towards its zenith, the panic on the ship subsides. The men see you engaged in your strange ritual with the rock and trust it, because they have to. There is no other option. This is the reality of their timekeeping. It was a constant, active interrogation of the environment, a series of clever hacks to cheat the immensity of nature. It wasn't abstract. It was a fight for information. The sunstone isn't a magic wand. It's a tool of last resort, pulled out when the primary systems, the sun and stars, have been knocked offline by the weather. Its value is incalculable. In this muffled world, You are the keeper of time and direction, your authority vested in a cloudy piece of rock. The slow, patient rotation of the crystal in your fingers becomes a meditation, a way to anchor yourself and your crew in the formless void. The fog doesn't lift, but the disorientation does. You know where the sun is. You know the morning is advancing. And for now, for your 60 men on a ship in the middle of nowhere, that is enough. The world may have disappeared, but time, stubbornly, ticks on. The fog finally lifts, not with a dramatic sweep, but by thinning slowly, reluctantly, until the world solidifies again around you, the dark water, the vast sky, and a sliver of a new moon, a pale, sharp fingernail clipping hanging in the twilight. The sun is gone, but its absence brings a different kind of clarity. With the stars not yet fully dominant, your attention shifts to this other, quieter celestial body. For the Viking, the moon is not just a night light. It's the most important short-term calendar they have, the metronome of the immediate future. Its cycle structures everything from the scheduling of feasts and legal assemblies to the timing of raids and the rhythm of farming. You track its phases with a diligence that would put a modern productivity guru to shame. Because missing a phase isn't an inconvenience, it's a potential catastrophe. A raid launched on a moonless night has the advantage of utter darkness. A feast planned for the full moon allows travelers to arrive safely from distant farms. The moon is your pocket planner, your shared public schedule, written in the sky for everyone to see. The mainstream historical fact here is that the Vikings operated on a lunisolar calendar. This is a bit of a brain twister as you're getting sleepy, but stick with me. Their months were lunar, based on the 29.5-day cycle from one new moon to the next. But their year needed to align with the solar cycle, the 365-day journey of the Earth around the sun that dictates the seasons. If you only follow 12 lunar months, your year is about 11 days short. So, every few years, an extra month, an intercalary month, had to be slipped in to resync the lunar calendar with the solar reality of the seasons. This wasn't done by some central office in Oslo. It was a decision made by local timekeepers, often powerful chieftains or law speakers. Based on observation, they'd watch for the signs of spring, the arrival of specific birds, the thaw of the ground, and if it was clear the lunar months were getting too far ahead of the solar season, they'd declare a summer extra month. Imagine the confusion. Sorry, folks, winter's going to be a bit longer this year. We're adding another month of frost and stored pickled fish. It was a flexible, living system. Historians still argue about the specifics of how this intercalation was decided and announced. Across the scattered Viking world, was there a risk of one fjord celebrating the start of summer while another, just over the mountains, was still stuck in the extra winter month? The potential for calendrical chaos is both hilarious and entirely plausible. Now for the quirky tidbit, the kind of folklore that blends practicality with pure poetry. Some later Scandinavian folk traditions speak of moon measuring. The idea was that the light of the moon had tangible, almost physical properties. Certain tasks, like slaughtering animals for winter storage, were best done in a waxing moon, the period when it was growing fuller. The belief was that meat salted during a waxing moon would absorb the salt better and not spoil, as if the moon's increasing light was pulling the preserving power into the meat. Conversely, wood for building or carving was best cut during the waning moon, as the decreasing light meant the sap was receding into the roots, resulting in drier, harder, less worm-prone timber. It's a beautiful concept that the moon's light didn't just illuminate the world, but actively influenced its very substance. So you stand on the deck, watching that thin crescent. You're not just seeing a pretty sight, you're reading a schedule. This new moon means the Thing Assembly, the great gathering for law and trade, is precisely 2 weeks away. It means the tides will be at their most extreme for the next few days, the spring tides, which will allow your heavy longship to be beached far higher on the shore for repairs. It means the nights will be darkest in about a week, perfect for a covert approach to an unsuspecting coast. Your life is governed by this rhythm. You can feel the month stretching out ahead of you, its phases partitioning time into manageable chunks. The waxing moon is for action, for growth, for outward journeys. The full moon is for culmination, for celebration, for the height of power. The waning moon is for introspection, for preparation, for drawing things in. And the dark moon, those few nights when it vanishes entirely, is a time of quiet unease, of stories told in low voices by the fire, a time when the barriers between the worlds were said to be thin. You don't need to carve notches in a stick yet. The moon is doing the counting for you. Its silent, luminous face a constant, reassuring reminder that time is not a formless river, but a cycle, Predictable and eternal, it will always come back. It will always begin again. The longship finally crunches onto the gravel of your home fjord. The familiar scent of wood smoke and damp earth washing over you. A tangible relief after the formless salt of the open ocean. The grand cosmic clocks of the sun and stars are now background players. Here, on land, time becomes a more intimate, handheld thing. You step into your longhouse, the air thick with the smell of stewed meat and old hay, and your hand goes not to a timepiece, but to a specific piece of wood leaning by the doorframe. It's your primstaff, your runic calendar staff. It looks deceptively simple, like a walking stick someone has absent-mindedly carved notches into. But to you, it is the arbiter of your daily life, the ledger of the coming year, a whole universe of appointments and obligations etched into a single piece of wood. This is how you bridge the gap between the majestic, impersonal time of the heavens and the muddy, immediate time of the farm, the family, and the law. The mainstream historical fact about these calendar staves is their ingenious, binary design. They weren't just random scratches. The staff had two main sides, one for the winter half of the year, beginning around October 14th, and the other for the summer half, beginning around April 14th. Along each edge, a series of small notches, one for each day of the half year, were meticulously carved. But the real magic wasn't in the days, it was at the notch. On specific days, corresponding to important dates in the pagan and later Christian calendars, a special symbol was carved. A cross might mark a major feast day. A fish might indicate a fasting period. A rudimentary sickle might mark the start of the harvest. You don't count the days by numbers, you count them by the icons. You run your thumb over the smooth wood, feeling for the next symbol. A small ship. That's in 3 days' time, the official start of the sailing season, when the weather is deemed stable enough to venture out again. The entire rhythm of the community is synchronized by these sticks. Everyone has one, and they all theoretically have the same symbols on the same days. It's a distributed wooden internet for scheduling. Historians still argue whether these staves were a purely Christian-era invention that retroactively applied new meanings to old pagan dates, or if they were a direct continuation of a much older Viking tradition of notch timekeeping simply co-opted and modified by the new religion. The debate hinges on whether the symbols are ancient or imported, a silent war fought over the interpretation of a carved fish. Now for the wonderfully quirky tidbit. While the main symbols were for big, community-wide events, many staves contained personal, cryptic markings known only to the family that owned them. A tiny axe might not mean Feast of St. Olaf to you, but might be a reminder that your neighbor, Bjorn, owes you a day of wood-chopping labor on that date. A faint spiral could be a personal memo to check the beehives. It was a primitive, analog personal organizer. Even quirkier, some folklore suggests that on the night of the winter solstice, if you held your primstaff over the fire, the shadows cast by the notches would predict the weather for the corresponding weeks of the coming year. A long, sharp shadow meant a harsh frost during that week. A fuzzy, weak shadow promised a thaw. It was a form of pyroscrying, using your calendar to try and cheat time itself. So your day, now back on solid ground, is governed by this stick. In the morning, before the sun has properly cleared the mountains, you take it down. You feel the notch for today. It's blank, an ordinary day. But your thumb moves to the next symbol, a small, carved goat. That's 2 days from now. The signal to move the livestock to the higher summer pastures. The sight of it sets a dozen tasks in motion in your mind. That means you need to mend the fencing tomorrow. You need to speak to your son about leading the drive. You need to check the salt stores for the cheese that will be made up there. This simple notch has just dictated your next 48 hours. The stick is more than a calendar. It's a to-do list, a contract, a memory aid. It carries the weight of expectation and obligation. You can't just forget to check it. To do so would be to fall out of step with your entire world, to miss the thing, to be late for the harvest, to fail to observe a holy day. The pressure of the ocean was the fear of the void. The pressure of the farm is the weight of communal duty, and it's all carved into this piece of wood in your hand. You hang it back by the door, its silent pronouncement structuring your life one glyph at a time. The sun and moon are for poets and sailors. This stick, this is for everyone else. You leave the longhouse, the weight of the run-a-staff schedule on your mind, and you step into the yard. The world is waking up, but you're not looking at a sundial, some fancy imported contraption. From the south, you don't need one. The entire world around you is a clock. Your farm, nestled in the embrace of the fjord, is a vast, natural timepiece, and you've spent a lifetime learning to read its face. This is the most fundamental, the most ancient form of timekeeping, using the horizon itself. Before any stones were carved, before any runes were notched, people were watching where the sun rose and set against the familiar silhouette of their own world. For you, time is not measured in hours, but in shadows and light playing across the mountains you know like the back of your own hand. The mainstream historical fact is that this practice, called horizon astronomy or mountain calendar astronomy, is one of the oldest and most universal methods of timekeeping across all cultures. For the Vikings, it was incredibly precise. They didn't just note that the sun rose in the east. They knew it rose over a specific jagged peak on the winter solstice, and then each day, they would watch that rising point slowly march along the mountain ridge toward the north, until the summer solstice, where it would rise over a distinct notch or a lone tall pine tree. Before beginning its slow journey back, your entire annual calendar was literally written on the horizon. The summer solstice wasn't just a date. It was the day the sun finally kissed the top of the Hjorten Peak. The start of the fishing season might be when the midday sun cleared the southern ridge and first hit the still waters of the inner fjord, signaling a change in the water temperature. Your life was a dance with the light. Historians still argue about the sheer precision of this method. Could a community really agree that a specific day, say for a festival, was defined by the sun rising directly behind a certain rock, given the variables of weather and individual perception? Or were these horizon markers used for broader, seasonal shifts, with more precise timing handled by other methods, like the moon or the primstaff? It is a debate between the romantic idea of a perfectly sensed natural world and the pragmatic messiness of daily life. Now for the wonderfully quirky, almost animistic tidbit. Certain natural features weren't just markers. They were believed to have their own relationship with the sun. There's a folk tale, passed down in various forms, about the sleeping sun. On the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, the sun was said to be so tired from its long journey that it would rest for a moment in a specific bowl-shaped valley on the horizon before beginning its climb back. If you were quiet and still, and the clouds were just right, you might see the sun hesitate there, gathering its strength. It was a moment of cosmic empathy, a shared exhaustion between the people shivering in the cold and the weary sun itself. Another belief was that the first ray of sun to hit a certain sacred rock on the spring equinox would imbue it with special power for the coming year, and people would place offerings there to be charged by that initial potent light. So you go about your morning chores, your movements timed by the light. You don't need to look at a stick inside. You know that when the sun finally clears the eastern ridge and its light hits the flat stone by the well, that's the time to begin milking the goats. The shadow of the great ash tree in the center of the farm will touch the corner of the forge when it is time for the first meal of the day, and you know, with a deep, ingrained certainty, that when the afternoon sun disappears behind the western peak of Storhorn, you have less than an hour of good light left to finish your work. This knowledge isn't written down. It's passed down through generations, from parent to child, as much a part of the inheritance of the farm as the land itself. See that, boy? When the sun touches the eagle's nest on the cliff, it's time to bring the sheep in. It's a visceral, embodied understanding of time. You feel the day progressing in the warmth on your skin, in the length of the shadows, in the changing angle of the light through the smoke vent of the longhouse. Your body is set to this rhythm. The landscape is not a passive backdrop to your life. It is an active participant, a silent, steady conductor keeping the tempo of your existence. To be pulled from this place, to be taken to a flat, featureless land, would be the ultimate disorientation. You wouldn't just be homesick, you'd be time-sick, cut adrift from the very mechanisms that tell you who you are, and when you are. The bleating of the goats is not just background noise. It's the first chime of the morning's clock. It's a sound of pure, insistent demand, a biological alarm that cannot be snoozed. This is the rhythm of the Viking farm, a rhythm dictated not by the grand movements of celestial bodies, but by the urgent, mundane, and inescapable needs of the animals that share your life. Your time is not your own. It belongs to the creatures whose survival ensures yours. The sun might be hidden behind a blanket of drizzle. The moon might be a forgotten sliver in a gray sky. But the goats need milking. The cows need to be let out to pasture. The chickens need to be scattered their grain. These are the auditory and olfactory time signals that structure the day into manageable, repeating blocks. This is timekeeping at its most fundamental, its most animal level. The mainstream historical fact here is the concept of the eight, a Old Norse unit of time that roughly equated to a period of about 1.5 hours. But its definition wasn't mechanical, it was situational. An eight was the time it took to perform a standard set of chores, One eighth might be the time needed to milk a specific number of goats. Another might be the time required to muck out a stall, or chop a certain amount of firewood. The day was divided into 8 of these eighter, stretching from dawn until dusk. So, your schedule wasn't 10 a.m. milking, it was the first 8 after full light, milking. Your life was measured out in tasks completed, a tangible, productive form of time. You didn't waste time, you filled eighter. The length of an 8 even changed with the seasons, longer in the summer when the days were long and there was more work to be done, and shorter in the deep winter when the work was confined to the essentials, and done in a frantic rush against the early darkness. Historians still argue about the flexibility and local variation of the 8. Was an 8 in a rich, powerful chieftain's longhouse, with dozens of thralls to do the work, the same length as an 8 on a poor, isolated farm where a single family did everything themselves? Did the concept hold any meaning for a Viking trader in a foreign market, far from the sounds and smells of the farm? It was likely a deeply localized, personal sense of time, not a standardized unit you could set a watch by. Now for the quirky, slightly ridiculous tidbit that would have been a daily reality. One of the most important and smelliest timekeeping methods involved the domestic pig. Pigs are creatures of habit. They expect to be fed at very specific times and will loudly, relentlessly protest any deviation from the schedule. Their squealing was a notorious farmstead clock, but it went further. There's evidence from later Scandinavian farmsteads of a practice called slamming the feed bucket. The theory was that the specific, resonant sound of a wooden bucket being slammed against a certain post would carry across the fields and call the pigs home from their rooting in the woods. This sound, made at the same time every day, became an auditory marker for the entire community. It wasn't just for the pigs. It signaled the end of one work 8 and the beginning of another, perhaps the 8 for the main meal. So, your entire afternoon could be scheduled by the aggressive clatter of a bucket against a post and the ensuing cacophony of grateful, hungry pigs. So you move through your day, your ears constantly tuned to the sounds of your livelihood. The first goat's bleat starts the sequence. You milk them, the rhythmic ping of the streams hitting the wooden pail a timer in itself. That task fills the first 8. As you finish, you hear the distant sound of your neighbor's axe talk, a steady, rhythmic sound that tells you he's in his wood chopping 8. You know by the pace and duration of the chopping that he's nearly finished. Your wife starts grinding grain on the cornstone inside the longhouse. The harsh, grating rumble means it's the 8 for preparing the day's bread. The day unfolds as a symphony of familiar, productive noises, each one a marker of progress, each one a confirmation that the world is turning as it should. There is a deep comfort in this rhythm. It is predictable, tangible, and utterly devoid of abstraction. You are not counting minutes, you are living them, each one filled with a purpose that directly sustains you and your family. The pressure of the ocean was vast and existential. The pressure of the farm is immediate and physical. The sun may be the king of time, and the moon its queen. But here on the ground, the goats are the demanding, unforgiving taskmasters, and their rule is absolute. The rhythmic, grating sound of the cornstone from inside the longhouse is a sound from Midgard, the world of men. But as the day's chores wind down and the light begins to fail, your mind can drift from the earthly aether to a more cosmic scale of time. You sit by the central hearth, the fire casting dancing shadows on the soot-blackened walls, and the stories begin. The old tales aren't just entertainment. They are a different kind of timekeeping, a way of connecting the daily grind to the eternal, of understanding your place in a universe whose clock is immeasurably vast. The very framework of that universe, the great world tree Yggdrasil, is itself a representation of time, and its rhythms are the slowest and most profound of all. The mainstream historical fact, drawn from the Norse Eddas, is that Yggdrasil is not a static symbol. It is a living, suffering, cyclical entity whose existence defines the flow of time. It endures constant torment, a serpent, Nidhogg, gnawing at its roots, a stag eating its leaves, rot setting into its trunk, yet it perseveres. This is a metaphor for the entropy and decay inherent in the passage of time, but also for its resilience. The tree's suffering is part of its nature, just as struggle is part of life. More importantly, the mythology speaks of a great, final event, Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. This isn't just an end, it's a cleansing, after which the world is reborn, green and beautiful again, and a new generation of gods emerges. Time, in this worldview, is not a linear march toward an end, but a series of cycles: creation, preservation, destruction, and rebirth, on a scale so grand it makes a human lifetime seem like the blink of an eye. Historians and scholars of religion still argue intensely about how literally the Vikings believed in this cyclical, apocalyptic model. Was Ragnarok a deeply held article of faith, a story that shaped their fatalistic courage, or was it more of a compelling mythological narrative, a way to make sense of the world's chaos and the inevitability of death? The answer likely lies somewhere in between, varying from person to person, poet to warrior. Now for the wonderfully quirky, deep-cut tidbit. The lore around Yggdrasil is full of tiny, strange temporal details. One of the least discussed is the concept of Yggdrasil's sleep. Some interpretations of the mythos suggest that the great tree itself has a daily rhythm. Its rustling leaves are not just the wind, but its breathing, and it was said that in the deepest part of the night, the tree would enter a state of profound rest, a stillness that allowed for visions and messages from the roots the underworld to travel more easily to the highest branches. Asgard. So, the best time for seers and Volvas to practice their magic, to interpret dreams and omens, was during this tree sleep, when the barriers between worlds were thinned. Your nightly rest was happening in parallel with the rest of the axis of the universe itself. So, as you listen to the saga of the gods' follies and triumphs, you're not just hearing stories, you're receiving a lesson in a different kind of time. Your primstav counts the days until the next feast. The moon counts the days until the next assembly. But Yggdrasil counts the ages until the next rebirth of everything. It's a humbling, almost sleepy thought. Your struggles with the farm, the worries about the weather, the anticipation of a raid, they are all so small in the face of the great tree, as slow agony and endurance. And yet, they are connected. The rot in the tree, as trunk is like the rot that can set into your stored grain if you are not careful. The serpent at the root is like the hidden dangers in the forest. The cyclical nature of Ragnarok is reflected in the cyclical nature of your own life. Birth, growth, struggle, death, and the hope that your children will carry on, reborn into a better world. Sitting by the fire, the weight of this cosmic time settles over you not as a burden, but as a strange comfort. Your life is a brief flicker in the grand scheme, but it is a part of the scheme nonetheless. You are a tiny leaf on the immense ancient tree of time, feeling the slow sap of centuries flow through you, connected to the roots of the past, and the branches of a future you will never see, but which your actions will help shape. The weight of cosmic time is a heavy blanket, but the next morning, the needs of the community bring you back to the immediate, human scale ticking of the clock. You've been called to serve at the Thing, the regional assembly where laws are recited, disputes are settled, and the social order of your world is maintained. But here, time is measured not by the sun's arc or a notched stick, but by a man's lungs and his memory. The law speaker, the most respected and knowledgeable man in the district, stands on the law rock, and his voice is the hourglass. He must recite the entire body of law from memory, and the length of his recitation, the pauses for breath, the rhythm of his speech, this structures the day's proceedings. There are no timeouts, number lunch breaks called by a clock. There is only the law, and the man speaking it. The mainstream historical fact about the Thing is the immense importance placed on the oral tradition. The law speaker was a walking, talking library. His role was to recite 1/3 of the laws each year over the course of the assembly, ensuring that over a 3-year cycle, the entire legal code was heard by everyone. The timing of this was everything. He had to speak clearly and slowly enough to be understood by the hundreds of men gathered on the slopes. But he also had to maintain a steady pace to cover the required ground before the daylight failed, or the assembly's designated time concluded. His performance was a feat of endurance and precision. A day at the Thing was literally measured in clauses and chapters. A complex land dispute might be allotted the time it takes to recite the laws on inheritance. A smaller case of slander might be given the time it takes to recite the laws on personal honor. The law itself was the meter of the meeting. Historians still argue about the practicalities of this. How did they handle a law speaker with a weak voice or a propensity for long, dramatic pauses? Was there an unofficial timekeeper, perhaps watching the sun's position, who would signal to the speaker to hurry up or slow down? Or was the pace of justice entirely at the mercy of one man's stamina and rhetorical style? The potential for a dreadfully slow speaker to drag out an assembly for days, or a fast talker to rush through weighty judgments, is a fascinating flaw in the system. Now for the quirky, human tidbit that brings it all down to earth. The Thing was a massive social gathering, and with it came all the biological realities of a large crowd. There were no designated comfort breaks, so how did they manage? Evidence suggests that the flow of men away from and back to the assembly grounds itself became an informal timekeeping method. A lull in the law speaker's recitation, perhaps to take a drink of water, would trigger a wave of men discreetly heading for the tree line to relieve themselves. The comings and goings were like a tide. You could judge how long a particular legal argument had been going on by the number of times the audience tide had ebbed and flowed. It was a collective, unspoken bodily clock. Furthermore, the grumbling of stomachs became a marker for the main meal, when the low rumble of hunger from the crowd began to compete with the law speaker's voice. It was time to call a halt for food. Justice was important, but so was lunch. So you stand there on the slopes of the Thingvellir, surrounded by your peers. Your feet ache. The sun beats down. The law speaker's voice is a steady drone, a river of words carving through the day. You aren't watching the sky. You are listening to the law. Your sense of time is tied to the progression of the legal code. You know that when he moves from the laws of property to the laws of maritime safety, the morning is well advanced. You know that the most serious cases, those requiring the fullest attention of the crowd, will be heard after the recitation of the laws on murder, which always comes after the midday break. The breaks themselves are called not by a bell, but by the speaker concluding a major section and announcing a pause. The entire assembly operates on his rhythm. It is a profoundly human-centered way to mark time. It is slow. It is meandering. It is subject to all the flaws and quirks of the individual at its center, but it is also deeply respectful. Time is given to the law. The law is not rushed to fit into time. You are bored. You are tired. You are hungry. But you are also part of a process whose tempo is dictated by the gravity of the matters at hand. The sun continues its journey across the sky, indifferent to the disputes below. But for you, time has momentarily stopped being a celestial phenomenon and has become entirely about words, memory, and the fragile, human endeavor of creating order. The gravity of the law gives way to the gravity of your stomach. The thing assembly breaks, not with a chime, but with a collective, pragmatic shift in focus toward the cooking fires. The year, for a Viking, isn't a numbered sequence from 1 to 365. It's a sensory experience, a rotating carousel of smells, tastes, and labors. Your calendar is written in the smoke of different fires, the feel of different tools in your hand, and the distinct fatigue in your muscles at the end of the day. Time is not an abstract concept. It is the taste of fresh cheese in summer and the tough, salted mutton of winter. It is the smell of turned earth in spring and the pungent odor of fish drying on racks in the autumn breeze. You don't say it's July. You say it's haymaking. You don't say it's November. You say it's slaughter month. Your life is partitioned by purpose, not by digits. The mainstream historical fact is that the Viking year was divided into two unequal halves, the nightless summer Scandagi and the long night of winter Scandagi. But within these, they used a system of months, each name a perfect, poetic descriptor of its primary activity or natural state. This wasn't a poetic flourish, it was pure practicality. Wary late January to late February was the time of deepest frost, when the stored food was running low and life was hardest. Gay late February to late March marked the beginning of the thaw, when the sun's return was truly felt. Einmanor late March to late April was the lone month, likely the last month of isolation before the sailing season opened and travel resumed. Harpa, late April to late May, was a woman's name, perhaps signaling a festival or the time of planting. Skerpla late May to late June is more mysterious, but might relate to the splitting of ice or earth. Solmanor late June to late July was the sun month, the height of light. Hayanor late July to late August was haymaking. Tvimanor late August to late September was the 2-month or second month of harvest. Historians still argue about the exact timing and regional variations of these month names. What was called Harpa in Norway might have had a completely different name, an association in Iceland or Greenland. The calendar was likely hyperlocal, tied to the specific climate and customs of each valley and fjord. Now for the wonderfully quirky tidbit that involves your nose. The Vikings were reportedly very attuned to the smells of the year, using them as a kind of olfactory calendar. The first spring rain on thawing earth had a specific name, and was a cause for celebration. The smell of the first cut hay was the smell of security for the winter, but the most important smell was the pungent, acrid odor of ammonia from fermenting urine, which was used in the fulling process to treat and thicken wool cloth. This process, nista, was done at a specific time of year, usually in the early autumn. So, if you were walking through a Viking settlement and got a strong whiff of what smelled like a giant, neglected latrine, you didn't hold your nose. You nodded to yourself, ah, right on time. It's nista season. The smell meant winter cloaks were being prepared. It was the smell of Impending cold, a nasal alarm clock for the change of the seasons. So you move through your year, your body and senses constantly informing you of the time. The deep, bone-aching cold of worry is a feeling you know well. The frantic, back-breaking labor of Haner, when every hour of sunlight is precious for gathering winter. Fodder is a fatigue that defines those weeks. The dark, introspective quiet of Joe Manowar, broken by the feasts of Yule, is a mood that settles over the entire community. You don't need to consult the runnerstaff every day. The very air tells you what time it is. The taste of sour whey in summer is different from the taste of strong, aged beer in winter. The sound of the wind in the bare branches of Gormanowar is different from the sound of insects in the high grass of Somanur. Your life is a continuous, unbroken cycle of these sensory markers. To lose track of the month would be to miss the planting, to be late for the harvest, to fail to slaughter the animals before the first deep snow. It would be a catastrophic disconnection from the rhythm of life itself. The year isn't something that passes you by. It is something you actively live inside, a wheel that you help turn with your own hands, your own sweat, and your own senses. The gravity of the law gives way to the gravity of your stomach. The thing assembly breaks, not with a chime, but with a collective, pragmatic shift in focus toward the cooking fires. The year, for a Viking, isn't a numbered sequence from 1 to 365. It's a sensory experience, a rotating carousel of smells, tastes, and labors. Your calendar is written in the smoke of different fires, the feel of different tools in your hand, and the distinct fatigue in your muscles at the end of the day. Time is not an abstract concept. It is the taste of fresh cheese in summer and the tough, salted mutton of winter. It is the smell of turned earth in spring and the pungent odor of fish drying on racks in the autumn breeze. You don't say it's July, you say it's haymaking. You don't say it's November, you say it's slaughter month. Your life is partitioned by purpose, not by digits. The mainstream historical fact is that the Viking year was divided into two unequal halves, the nightless summer Scandagi and the long night of winter Scandagi. But within these, they used a system of months, each name a perfect, poetic descriptor of its primary activity or natural state. This wasn't a poetic flourish, it was pure practicality. Wary late January to late February was the time of deepest frost, when the stored food was running low and life was hardest. Gay late February to late March marked the beginning of the thaw, when the sun's return was truly felt. Einmanor late March to late April was the lone month, likely the last month of isolation before the sailing season opened and travel resumed. Harpa, late April to late May, was a woman's name, perhaps signaling a festival or the time of planting. Skerpla late May to late June is more mysterious, but might relate to the splitting of ice or earth. Somanor late June to late July was the sun month, the height of light. Haner late July to late August was haymaking. Tvimanor late August to late September was the 2-month or second month of harvest. Historians still argue about the exact timing and regional variations of these month names. What was called Harpa in Norway might have had a completely different name, an association in Iceland or Greenland. The calendar was likely hyperlocal, tied to the specific climate and customs of each valley and fjord. Now for the wonderfully quirky tidbit that involves your nose. The Vikings were reportedly very attuned to the smells of the year, using them as a kind of olfactory calendar. The first spring rain on thawing earth had a specific name, and was a cause for celebration. The smell of the first cut hay was the smell of security for the winter, but the most important smell was the pungent, acrid odor of ammonia from fermenting urine, which was used in the fulling process to treat and thicken wool cloth. This process, nista, was done at a specific time of year, usually in the early autumn. So, if you were walking through a Viking settlement and got a strong whiff of what smelled like a giant, neglected latrine, you didn't hold your nose, you nodded to yourself, ah, right on time. It's nista season. The smell meant winter cloaks were being prepared. It was the smell of impending cold, a nasal alarm clock for the change of the seasons. So you move through your year, your body and senses constantly informing you of the time. The deep, bone-aching cold of worry is a feeling you know well. The frantic, back-breaking labor of Haner, when every hour of sunlight is precious for gathering winter. Fodder is a fatigue that defines those weeks. The dark, introspective quiet of Joe Manowar, broken by the feasts of Yule, is a mood that settles over the entire community. You don't need to consult the runnerstaff every day. The very air tells you what time it is. The taste of sour whey in summer is different from the taste of strong, aged beer in winter. The sound of the wind in the bare branches of Gormanowar is different from the sound of insects In the high grass of soul manure, your life is a continuous, unbroken cycle of these sensory markers. To lose track of the month would be to miss the planting, to be late for the harvest, to fail to slaughter the animals before the first deep snow. It would be a catastrophic disconnection from the rhythm of life itself. The year isn't something that passes you by. It is something you actively live inside, a wheel that you help turn with your own hands, your own sweat, and your own senses. The saga's final words hang in the air, a ghost of heroism and sorrow, before fading into the crackle of the fire and the rustle of men shifting. The spell of Fortuarson breaks. You blink, returning to the present, to the cold ground of the Thingvellir and the lingering smell of damp wool and smoke. The timeless world of stories recedes, and you are back in a world governed by a much older, more relentless, and utterly predictable rhythm. The tide, for all their gods and heroes, for all their sunstones and runestaves, the one clock the Vikings could never argue with, never petition, and never ignore, was the cosmic metronome of the moon's gravitational pull on the sea. If you live by the water, your life is scheduled by its inhale and exhale. The mainstream historical fact is that the Vikings were masters of tidal lore. Their entire maritime existence, from launching a raid to beaching a ship for repairs to establishing a trading post, was dictated by the state of the tide. They understood the pattern of spring tides, the highest high tides and lowest low tides, during the new and full moons, and neap tides, the weaker tides, during the moon's quarters. With an intuitive, practiced knowledge, a high tide could mean the difference between sailing a laden longship straight up a river to a rich monastery, or having to drag it over exposed, treacherous mudflats under a hail of arrows. A low tide could reveal a perfect, sheltered bay for camp, or it could strand your vessel on its side, leaving you vulnerable for hours. They knew that the tidal cycle was approximately 6 hours and 12 minutes from high to low tide, and they would have estimated this passage not with a clock but by observing the rate at which the water crept up or down a known rock post or stretch of beach. Their lives literally ebbed and flowed with the sea. Historians still argue about the extent of their predictive knowledge. Could they calculate tides for a foreign coast they'd never visited before, based solely on the phase of the moon? Or was their expertise intensely local, built up over generations of observing a specific home fjord, and then cautiously applied to new locations? The difference is significant. One suggests a near-scientific understanding of a global phenomenon. The other suggests a brilliant, but localized, observational pragmatism. Now for the quirky and slightly terrifying tidbit that speaks to their respect for this force. The tides weren't just a practical concern. They were woven into their worldview. There was a belief, particularly in Iceland, in tidal waves of a different sort. Folklore told of Aegir and Ran, the Jotun god and goddess of the sea, who would sometimes send not a giant wave, but a tide of sleep Svefnir washing over a community. This was a sudden, inexplicable lethargy that would fall upon everyone in a coastal village, making them lie down and fall into a deep slumber at the same time, often coinciding with the turning of the tide. It was seen as a capricious act by the sea deities, a reminder of their power not just over the physical world, but over the very consciousness of those who lived by their grace. To fall asleep unnaturally was to be caught in Ran's net. So, whether at home or on a foreign shore, your daily schedule is perpetually at the mercy of the water. You wake and your first thought isn't for the sun, it's for the sound of the waves on the shore. You listen to it. Is it a gentle lapping, meaning the tide is low and still coming in? Or is it a deeper, more powerful crash against the rocks, signaling the high tide is near its peak? You know that when the water just begins to uncover the third barnacle-crusted rock from the end of your dock, it's time to gather the nets, because the fish will be running with the outgoing current. You know that when the tide is fully out, exposing the vast, dark kelp-strewn flats, that's your window to collect mussels and clams, a 4-hour window before the cold water rushes back in to claim its own. Your plans are written in water. A meeting is set for 2 tides from now. A journey begins on the next high tide. It is the most democratic of clocks. It cares not for your social status, your wealth, or your urgency. The tide will rise and fall according to its own ancient schedule, and you will arrange your life around it, or you will fail. The saga's heroes could defy gods and monsters, but not one of them could command the tide to wait. The tide eventually recedes, leaving the longship settled firmly on the wet gravel of the shore. The work of unloading and repair begins, but as night falls, your gaze lifts from the earthly domain of water and returns to the heavens. The stars, your old guides, have reappeared, but now you look at them with a more nuanced eye. Beyond the simple clockwork rotation of the Viking wagon around the Lidarstjarna, the Norse had a rich and complex relationship with the night sky populating it, with their own constellations, and stories that served as both a map and a calendar. The sky wasn't a random scattering of lights. It was a storybook, a tool, and a clock face all in one, and learning to read its finer print was a crucial skill. The mainstream historical fact is that Viking astronomy was deeply practical and woven into their mythology. We've already met Lidarstjarna Polaris and the Vikingawan the Big Dipper, which they saw as a chariot or wagon, but their celestial map included many more figures. The constellation we know as Orion was likely Orwandal's toe, from the myth of the giant hunter whose toe broke off and was thrown into the sky, to become the star we call Algol. The Milky Way was known as Vinterbrodden, the winter road, as its bright path was most visible on clear winter nights, and was poetically imagined as a road used by the gods. Cassiopeia's distinctive W shape was Frigg's distaff, a tool used in spinning, linking the domestic craft of the goddess to the heavens. Each of these wasn't just a picture, its movement and position held meaning. The appearance of Orwandal in the winter sky signaled the height of the hunting season, while the position of Frigg's distaff could indicate the depth of the night. Historians and astronomers still argue about the completeness of our understanding of their star lore. The sources are fragmentary, recorded after Christianization, and likely only represent a fraction of a much richer oral tradition. Were there constellations whose names and stories are completely lost to us? Did different regions have different interpretations of the same star patterns? The night sky we look at today is, in a very real way, a palimpsest, with our modern Greek-derived constellations overriding an older Norse layer that we can only partially decipher. Now for the quirky and beautiful tidbit. Some stars were believed to have a direct, almost personal influence on the world below. The star Sirius, the brightest in the night sky, was known as Loka Brenna, Loki's torch or Loki's brand, its first heliacal rising its first appearance in the dawn sky, after a period of being invisible occurred in late July. This coincided with the hottest, driest part of the summer. The Vikings, ever pragmatic poets, connected the two. The scorching heat of late summer wasn't just weather, it was the influence of Loki's mischievous, destructive firebrand star shining down upon them. The star's appearance was a warning to be extra vigilant against fires in the home and in the fields. It was a clock that told you to start worrying about drought. So you stand on the midnight shore, the work finished, and you look up. You don't just see the wagon circling the pole star. You see a tapestry of myths and practical guides. You note that Orwandal is now clear of the eastern horizon. The deep cold of winter is firmly upon you. Frigg's distaff is high overhead, telling you the night is at its midpoint, and there, just visible in the south, is the faint, flickering glow of Loka Brenna, absent for so long, now returning to the pre-dawn sky, even in the depths of winter. Its faint presence is a promise of the scorching summer to come, a reminder of the cyclical nature of the year. The sky is not a cold, impersonal void. It is a community. The gods, the heroes, the monsters, and the tools of daily life are all up there, going about their business. Your timekeeping is an active participation in this community. By tracking their movements, you are engaging with the myths, living the stories, and aligning your small, earthly life with the grand, eternal dance above. The tide rules the water, but the stars rule the sky, and your life is spent navigating the space between them. Guided by the stories etched in light, the long winter night stretches on, an endless, star-studded blanket that smothers the world in a deep and profound silence. This is the Scandagi, the short days, and it does something strange to time. The reliable markers the sun's arc, the long periods of light vanish. Your world shrinks to the circle of firelight in the longhouse, the sound of breath, the smell of stew simmering for hours. The rigid structure of the actor softens and blurs, when the sun only grudgingly hauls itself above the horizon for a few brief, gray hours before plunging back into darkness. The distinction between day and night becomes meaningless. Time doesn't stop, it becomes dreamlike, fluid, and governed by an internal, psychological clock rather than an external, celestial one. The mainstream historical fact is that the Viking calendar acknowledged this temporal distortion. The period around the winter solstice, Jul, was a liminal time, a gap in the normal order of things. It was a time when the usual laws both of men and of nature were believed to be suspended. The dead were thought to walk closer to the world of the living. The future could be divined. Normal work ceased. This wasn't just a holiday. It was a recognition that the very fabric of time was different. The sun had, in a very real sense, stopped its journey south for a few days. It rose and set in the same place. This solar standstill would have been terrifying and awe-inspiring to an agricultural people. Their entire ritual of Yule, the feasting, the sacrifices, the lighting of great fires and wheels of straw to encourage the sun's return was an attempt to restart the engine of time, to ensure the cycle would begin anew. Historians still argue about the psychological impact of the polar winter on the Viking mind, especially for those in the far north of Scandinavia or in Iceland. Did the prolonged darkness contribute to their rich and often dark mythology? Did it foster a kind of collective seasonal introspection, a winter dreaming where the internal world became more real than the external one? The evidence is in the stories themselves, which are full of long, dark nights, journeys into underworlds, and a pervasive sense of fatalism that feels born from a place where the light is a fleeting visitor. Now for the quirky, somnambulant tidbit. There are hints in later Nordic folklore of a phenomenon called Vindrdvala, the winter sleep. This wasn't just hibernation, it was a state of profound lethargy and dreaminess that was believed to descend upon people and animals during the darkest weeks. Productivity plummeted, people slept more, the mind turned inward. It was seen not as laziness, but as a natural, almost magical state of being aligned with the sleeping earth. Time was perceived as moving slower, and dreams were thought to be more vivid and prophetic. In this state, the measurement of time shifted from the sun to the body's own rhythms and the content of its dreams. A day might be measured between one significant dream and the next, so you spend these long weeks in a state of Vindrdvala. The primstav by the door still has its notches, but they feel abstract, like a schedule for a world that has temporarily ceased to exist. You wake, but is it morning? The sky is as black as when you lay down. You eat a meal, but is it lunch or dinner? There is no sun to tell you. Your life is reduced to the core elements: warmth, food, sleep, and stories. The storytelling around the fire takes on a new, deeper importance. It's not just entertainment. It's a way to create light and structure in the overwhelming dark, to define the passage of time by the completion of a tale rather than the movement of a shadow. You nap frequently. You dream vividly. The line between waking and sleeping is thin. A day is no longer a unit of work. It is a unit of endurance. You aren't waiting for a specific hour. You are waiting for the sun to finally decide to strengthen, for the world to wake up from its own deep sleep. Time becomes a patient, sleepy vigil. You measure it in logs added to the fire, in the gradual emptying of a storage barrel, in the slow deepening of the cold outside. The frantic, measured time of the sailing season and the harvest is a distant memory. This is time in its raw, slow, geological form, and you are simply living inside it, dreaming your way through the darkness, waiting for the world to begin again. As the world slowly wakes from its Vindrdvala, the light returning minute by precious minute each day, the need to fix moments in time, to make them permanent against the relentless flow, becomes paramount. The grand, cyclical clocks of the sky and the sea govern the living, but for the dead, and for legacy, a more permanent marker is required. This is where time becomes stone. You stand before a runestone, its surface cold and rough under your fingertips, the carved lines of the runes weathered but still stark and clear. This is not a tool for measuring the future, but an anchor point in the past. It is time made solid, a deliberate and eternal then to contrast with the ever-moving now. The mainstream historical fact about rune stones is their primary function as memorials. They were raised to honor the dead, to commemorate a great leader, a successful voyage, or a fallen warrior. The inscriptions often follow a formula. X raised this stone in memory of Y, her relation. Z carved these runes. But embedded in this simple formula is a profound act of timekeeping. By carving the name and the event into stone, the people who raised it were fixing that moment, that person, in the timeline of history. They were creating a permanent public record that would outlast living memory. It was a way to say, this person existed, this event happened, do not forget. In a society with an oral culture, the runestone was the closest thing to a written history book, a physical bulwark against the erosion of time and forgetfulness. Historians still argue whether some rune stones, particularly those with more complex inscriptions or unusual placement, served a secondary purpose as actual calendrical markers or boundary stones tied to the solar cycle. Could the shadow of a certain runestone at noon on the summer solstice have fallen on a specific point, marking a property line or a sacred site? Were some stones positioned to align with the rising or setting of certain stars on specific dates, creating a permanent, public sundial or star clock for the community? The evidence is tantalizing but inconclusive, a reminder that the pragmatic and the sacred were often intertwined in the Viking world. Now for the quirky, slightly spooky tidbit that surrounds these stones. Many later folk traditions attribute a kind of temporal magic to rune stones. They were sometimes called Nungstanger spitestaves or Tiwastiner, time stones in folklore. The belief was that the act of carving the runes, of inscribing the message into the stone, didn't just record a moment in time, it captured a piece of it. Some stories tell of people who could lay their hands on a runestone and, if they knew the right way to read it beyond the literal runes, experience echoes of the past. They might hear the clash of axes from a battle it commemorated, or feel the grief of the family who raised it. The stone became a psychic battery, charged with the emotions of the moment it was meant to preserve. Other tales warn of curses placed upon the stones, where anyone who moved or damaged them would be trapped in a loop of the worst moment of the deceased's life, forced to relive their death or failure for eternity. The stone wasn't just a marker, it was a prison for a fragment of time. So you stand before the stone, your fingers tracing the runes that spell out a name you never knew, a life lived centuries ago. The inscription is simple, but its existence is profound. It is a rip in the fabric of time, constant flow. The person who raised this stone is dust. The person it commemorates is dust. But the moment of their grief, their pride, their desire to remember, is still here, frozen in the granite. It is a stark contrast to the organic, cyclical time of the farm and the sea. This is linear time. This is a point of no return. The runestone doesn't care about the next high tide or the next full moon. It speaks only of one irrevocable event in the past. It is a stark memento mori amidst the busy, life-affirming rhythms of the other timekeeping methods. It reminds you that for all the cycles of the world, your own personal time is a straight line, and the runestone is a mile marker on that road, noting that someone important once passed this way. The cold of the stone seeps into your hand, a chill from the past, a permanent reminder that even in a world governed by endless cycles, individual moments and people are fleeting. The stone endures. The memory, thanks to the stone, endures, but the life does not. It is a solemn, heavy kind of time, and you leave the stone feeling quieter, more thoughtful, carrying the weight of someone else's forever frozen now into your own still-flowing present. The solid, silent permanence of the runestone at your back feels like the last bastion of the old ways, because ahead of you, a new sound is cutting through the familiar rhythms of the farm. It is not the bleat of a goat, nor the crash of the tide, nor the creak of a longship. It is the deliberate, metallic toll of a church bell, ringing from the new wooden church at the edge of the settlement. Its sound is alien, artificial, and utterly regimented. It rings at the same time every day, regardless of the cloud cover, the tide, or the phase of the moon. This sound marks the beginning of the end for the sleepy, observational time of the Vikings. The world is becoming standardized, and time is being taken from the hands of the people and given to a machine, to an institution. The mainstream historical fact is that the Christianization of Scandinavia, which gained real momentum from the 10th century onwards, brought with it a new way of organizing time. The church operated on a rigid, liturgical calendar of feast days, fasts, and prayers that demanded precision. The bell was its tool. It called the faithful to prayer at specific, fixed hours: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, nuns, vespers, compline. This was a complete overhaul of the old system. Time was no longer something you observed in the world around you. It was something you were told, something you obeyed. The sundial, and eventually the mechanical clock, began to replace the horizon and the primstaff. The year was increasingly numbered from the birth of Christ, rather than described by its seasonal labors. The very language of time was changing. Historians still argue whether this was a clean, abrupt break or a slow, messy fusion of traditions. Did the common farmer immediately abandon his primstaff for the church bell? Or did he simply add the new feast days to his old stick, creating a hybrid calendar that honored both Christ and Thor? Evidence suggests the latter was common for a long time. The old pagan festivals were often simply rebranded with Christian names. Yule became Christmas, for instance, and many of the old observational tricks persisted in rural areas for centuries. The debate is between a history of conquest and a history of assimilation. Now for the quirky, melancholic tidbit that symbolizes this transition. There's a strand of Nordic folklore that speaks of clocks and bells stealing sleep. The stories tell of people, particularly the elderly, who had lived their whole lives by the sun's rhythm, who found they could no longer rest properly after the church bell was installed. Its artificial regularity was said to tangle with the natural rhythm of their bodies. They would lie awake waiting for it to ring, their sleep becoming as segmented and anxious as the new divided day. Another belief was that the Mechanical clocks, with their intricate gears and constant ticking, were inhabited by tiny, restless spirits clocketeer that would whisper lists of chores and worries into the ears of those trying to sleep, speeding up their minds and making true rest impossible. The new time was efficient, but it was also nervous, demanding, and alienating. So you live in this time of overlap, of echoes. You still instinctively look to the horizon to judge the time of day. You still feel a deep internal pull when the moon is full. You know the smell of the first spring rain means it's time to mend the fences. But now, overlying all that, is the insistent, impersonal voice of the bell. Your life is becoming bifurcated. There is body time, the old, visceral rhythm of the farm, and there is clock time, the new, abstract schedule of the church and the emerging town. The primstaff by your door now has crosses carved next to the old symbols. You live in two temporal worlds at once. The intimate, participatory relationship with time is fading. You are becoming a consumer of time, rather than a participant in its creation. The pressure is different now. It's no longer the pressure of missing the tide or the harvest. It's the pressure of being late, of not meeting an artificial deadline, of failing to synchronize with a system that doesn't care about the weather or the light. The world is growing quieter in some ways. No more need to listen for the specific sound of the pig bucket, but it is also growing noisier with the constant, measured imposition of the bell. The old ways are not gone, not yet. They are echoes, but the echoes are growing fainter, drifting into the empty sky, slowly being replaced by the steady, hammered rhythm of iron on iron, marking hours that are all the same, in a world that is forever changing. The steady, hammered rhythm fades, not into silence, but into the soft, natural sounds it sought to replace. The bell's echo is absorbed back into the whisper of the wind over the fjords, the distant sigh of the waves on the shore, the gentle rustle of leaves in the ancient forests. That relentless, artificial tick-tock of the modern world slows, its edges blur, and its urgency dissolves. You can let it go now. There is no schedule to keep, no bell to answer, no clock to watch. The pressure to be on time, to be productive, to measure every moment, simply drifts away like smoke from a dying fire. You are back in the world of cycles, of observation, of patient, sleepy time. The moon will rise and set at its own pace. The stars will wheel in their silent, stately dance. The tide will continue its eternal, breathing rhythm of come and go, come and go. None of it needs your help. None of it demands your attention. It just is, and you can just be a part of it, a small, warm, breathing part of a vast, beautiful, and unhurried system. Your breath slows to match the tide. Your heartbeat becomes the gentle, muffled drum of the world at rest. The past is stone. The future is a dream. But the present is just this, a deep, soft, endless moment of peace, cradled in the arms of a time that knows only the turning of the earth and the gentle, glowing path of the moon on water. There is nothing to do. There is nowhere to be. There is only now, and now is soft, and dark, and still. Let the old ways hold you. Let the silence soothe you. Let the night carry you away into dreams of starlit seas and quiet fjords where time is just a story, and the story is always gentle, and the ending is always rest.